Hello, good evening and welcome to a special edition of Jeremy Kyle Live, Ghislaine Behind Bars. Now, she really is the most notorious female prison inmate on the planet. And tonight, Ghislaine Maxwell is seen and heard for the very first time in jail.
I feel completely divorced from the person that people reference and talk about.
Maxwell makes startling confessions about her infamous relationship with Jeffrey Epstein.
I obviously wish I'd never met him.
And she claims the notorious photo of her with Prince Andrew and Epstein victim Virginia Giuffre is a setup.
It's a fake. I don't believe that. I don't believe it's real for a second. In fact, I'm sure it's not.
But she doesn't have a single word of apology for her victims.
I say that Epstein died and they should take their disappointment and upset out on the authorities that allowed that to happen.
No doubt every minute of tonight's programme will be closely monitored in Windsor by Prince Andrew and his lawyers as they allegedly prepare a new legal case. But first, let's remind ourselves how Maxwell ended up as prisoner 02879-509. She was the toast of high society in both London and New York. Glamorous, sophisticated, Oxford-educated and with what close friends described as a wild and naughty streak, Ghislaine Maxwell was loved by women and adored by men. The daughter of newspaper tycoon Robert Maxwell, she had confidence, charm and a lifestyle to match. At the height of her powers in the mid-90s, Maxwell knew everyone there was to know. Her contacts book bulged with some of the world's biggest names, presidents, royalty and film stars. And if she invited any of them to one of her lavish penthouse parties, they couldn't wait to accept. But into this gilded life walked the man who would ultimately corrupt and destroy it. Billionaire financier Jeffrey Epstein. The pair became inseparable, with Ghislaine, who had grown up desperate to please her tyrannical father, just as keen to do anything for Epstein. And that included feeding his seemingly insatiable desire for sex with young girls. In 2005, the parents of a 14-year-old girl told police that Epstein had molested their daughter. 3 years later, he received an 18-month prison sentence. After his release, the allegations against him began to spiral, and he was accused of running a vast network of girls for sex, including on his private island and ranch. He was arrested again in 2019 on charges of sex trafficking and was found dead in his prison cell a month later in an apparent suicide. As the authorities' focus turned to Maxwell, she went into hiding. A photograph of her outside a Los Angeles branch of In-N-Out Burger sparked a media frenzy. In July 2020, she was arrested at a secluded mansion in the US state of New Hampshire. Prosecutors accused her of helping Epstein sexually abuse 4 vulnerable women. In December 2021, a jury found her guilty of 5 of 6 counts, including the most serious charge, that of sex trafficking of a minor.
The road to justice has been far too long, but today, justice has been done.
She was sentenced to 20 years in jail for grooming and sex trafficking and served time at the maximum security Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, where she was photographed with a black eye. Late last year, she was moved to the softer Federal Correctional Institute Tallahassee in Florida, where she's currently working in the prison's law center and library and preparing her appeal. And it's from that much cushier jail that Ghislaine Maxwell agreed to be interviewed for the very first time in a series of video and taped audio phone calls from behind bars. During that call, Maxwell told our interviewers and her brother Kevin, who was also present, that she's suffering from depression, having lost everything. She claimed to be keeping her spirits up by working every day on her appeal. And she revealed intimate details of how this one-time socialite is dealing with daily prison life.
So they wake you up at 6, and you can go to breakfast, which consists of a cereal a piece of fruit, generally. And then you have to make your bed sort of military style. So there's nothing that's sticking out or whatever. It has to be a prescribed way, otherwise you can to travel. You can get what's called a shot. And then at 7:30, you go to work, and for me that means I go to the law library to help people so they have detainers or they have warrants or they're trying to appeal their case and get a compassionate release, or they ask about the First Step Act and how credits are applied to their time, that sort of thing, and I answer those types of questions. I also help people file out their administrative remedies, and that is until 10 o'clock, when you have to come back, and they call lunch. Is around 10:30. The portion control is very odd, and then because I'm on a no meat diet, they're supposed to have either hummus or cottage cheese or tofu for you, but mostly, I'd say about 95% of it's tofu if it's anything, or beans. And I'd say 95% of it's beans, and then otherwise you have like a tofu substitute. And the tofu has there's no seasoning allowed, so there's no salt or pepper or anything. So it's beyond tasteless. And then you go back to work at 12. And that lasts until 3:30. When you come back and you have a stand-up head count at 4. And if you are lucky, they call recreation at some point during the day. If you're at work, you miss it. And if you're not, you get to go out for an hour.
Unless her appeal is successful, Ghislaine Maxwell will be nearly 80 years of age by the time she's free from prison. And it's pretty clear she only blames one man for her astonishing fall from grace, Jeffrey Epstein. Like Maxwell's father, Epstein was an enormously wealthy man from humble origins. Also, like Robert Maxwell, he would eventually be disgraced and die of an apparent suicide in disputed circumstances. In the 1990s, Ghislaine and Jeffrey had been lovers. By the mid-2000s, she was describing herself as merely working for the financier. In a 2003 profile, Epstein described Maxwell as his best friend, and much of his life appeared to be organised by her. Intimate photos of Maxwell and Epstein together that were released by prosecutors suggested they had remained close. Whatever the exact nature of their relationship, the prosecution was convinced they were a team in their pattern of abuse, with Maxwell seeking and grooming victims for Epstein. Victim Sarah Ransom, who says she was abused by Epstein, told the BBC Ghislaine controlled the girls.
This was an organization, sex trafficking pyramid, that was run by women. This sex trafficking pyramid wouldn't exist without Ghislaine. She was the enforcer.
Sisters Maria and Annie Farmer, the first to make claims against Epstein and Maxwell, both repeatedly testified in court that Ghislaine was involved at Epstein's behest. Now, Maxwell's supporters say hers is the classic story of a female scapegoat, a woman forced to accept blame for the sins of a man. Epstein's apparent suicide in 2019 robbed his victims of justice, and Maxwell claims they have unfairly turned their fire on her. Meeting Epstein has been the biggest regret of her life, but she is convinced his death was not as it seemed.
I believe that he was murdered. Well, I was shocked. And I wondered how it had happened. Because as far as I was concerned, he was going to... I was sure he was going to appeal. And I was sure that he was covered under the non-prosecution agreement. But I wasn't in the indictment. So I wasn't mentioned. I wasn't even one of the co-conspirators. I obviously wish I'd never met him. You know, looking back now, I probably wish I had stayed in England. But leaving that aside, you know, I tried to leave and start a new job and move on from the end of 98, 99. So I wish that I had been more successful at moving on. Because I became a banker, so I should have, you know, moved on completely. At the time, I wouldn't have had a problem introducing people to my friends to him, because I didn't know that he was so awful. I mean, obviously now, looking back with hindsight, of course, but at the time, I mean, he had lots of friends. I mean, he was friendly with just about everybody you can imagine. There was no reason to imagine that he wasn't someone of interest to people.
Extraordinary. Coming up next, Ghislaine Maxwell on Prince Andrew, victim Virginia Giuffre, and that infamous photo. You're watching a one-hour special of Jeremy Carr Live. We're coming back in 3. Welcome back. You're watching a JK Live special where we're playing you extraordinary and exclusive clips of a video interview with Ghislaine Maxwell from Behind Bars. Now, we've already heard her talk about Jeffrey Epstein. Now we can hear from Ghislaine about the other significant man in her life, Prince Andrew. The Queen's favourite son has been left a pariah and banned from official royal family duties after facing serious allegations from one of Epstein's victims. Now, firstly, we'll see how Maxwell helped drag a prince into the gutter, and then, unbelievable, we'll be hearing directly from her and how she thinks she can save a royal reputation. This is the infamous photo that helped bring down Prince Andrew. Smiling for the camera and with his arm around a teenage girl, the Duke of York poses inside Ghislaine Maxwell's West London flat while she watches on from behind. The girl Andrew is holding in the photo is Virginia Giuffre, née Roberts. She claims she was just 17 when Epstein and Maxwell brought her by plane from the US to London and first introduced her to Andrew during a party at Tramp nightclub. In court documents, she says the prince sexually assaulted her in London and on 2 other occasions in Epstein's mansion in New York and on his private island in the US Virgin Islands. In one interview, Giuffre also claimed the Duke even accidentally vomited on her. The prince has always strenuously denied her claims. Andrew has always insisted he was at this branch of Pizza Express in Woking when Virginia Giuffre says she was meeting him. Infamously, he also claimed in his disastrous BBC Newsnight interview that he doesn't sweat after Virginia accused him of being hot and sweaty on the Tramp nightclub dance floor. Last year, after months of legal wrangling, Prince Andrew agreed to settle the civil case with Miss Giuffre out of court, reportedly paying up to £12 million on the advice of his brother, now King Charles. This must be one of the most infamous photographs in recent memory, and it has done Prince Andrew and the royal family extraordinary reputational harm. Let's hear what Ghislaine Maxwell has to say about it.
It's a fake. I don't believe that. I don't believe it's real for a second. In fact, I'm sure it's not. There's never been an original. And further, there's no photograph. And I've only ever seen a photocopy of it. I don't believe it happened. And certainly the way as described would have been impossible. I don't have any memory of going to tramp. Certainly not an outfit that I would have worn. Her stories have changed so many times about what happens, when it happens, how it happens, with different versions. And each time she speaks, there's a different version. In fact, if you look at her BBC interview on the Panorama, I believe she says that he, or I can't remember, either he or, actually that he puked on her face. That's the only time she's ever said that.
In a separate interview recorded as audio only, Maxwell also launched a blistering attack on the integrity of Andrew's accuser, Virginia Giuffre.
I've read a lot of her deposition, and in her deposition, her statements are very categorical, and her stories are very detailed and elaborate. If her memory is so poor, then how can you rely on anything that she says? So I don't know on which it is, whether her memory is so bad that you can't really credit anything she says, or it's more disingenuous than that. I can't obviously tell you which it is, only she knows definitively the answer to that. You know, and like I said, I think once you retract on two men that you make claims against on the grounds that your memory is faulty, like I said, I think that, you know, you have to question everything that she says.
Now, Prince Andrew has been branded a fool for settling the case without fighting it in court. And now his legal team are allegedly preparing a counter-legal action against Virginia Giuffre. No doubt tonight's interview is being carefully monitored by Andrew in Windsor's Royal Lodge. Coming up in part 3, Ghislaine Maxwell addresses Epstein's victims, vows to win her appeal, and talks about how Andrew introduced her to Her Majesty, the late Queen. We're coming right back. Welcome back to part 3 of this very special edition of Jeremy Carr Live. We're showing you extracts of an extraordinary interview from behind bars with one of the world's most infamous female inmates, Ghislaine Maxwell. This lady used to have the world's elite on speed dial, but how her life has changed. But that doesn't seem to stop her from reminiscing about the good old days. These days, Maxwell's best friend is notorious double killer Narcy Novak. The pair have become close since meeting behind bars in Florida, with Novak serving life for murdering her millionaire husband and her mother-in-law. Novak has even given Maxwell an affectionate nickname, Dottie. Spending most of her time alone in a small US prison cell is all a far cry from the days when Maxwell was at the very top of London and New York society, and Prince Andrew introduced her to the late Queen. Or the time she and Hollywood pal Kevin Spacey sat laughing and joking on the Queen's throne at Windsor. Or when she was a guest of honour at the wedding of President Bill Clinton's daughter Chelsea. During the prison interviews, this time captured on audio only, Maxwell spoke about a moment meeting Her late Majesty.
I thought that the Queen was one of the most exceptional women I ever had the honour and privilege of briefly meeting. And I think anybody of her stature, the longevity of her reign, her elegance and her sheer capacity for dedication to her work and to her job really was just astonishing. And it was one of the greatest privileges of my life to have the honour to meet her. She radiated a warmth and a sparkle in her eyes that was just mesmerizing, really. And I shared the story that we shared was about horses, because I love horses and she loves horses, and so we talked about horses briefly, I remember, and just shared a love of horses, and that was one of her great loves.
Maxwell's friendship with the Clintons was also one of the most enduring and influential of her life. Attending Chelsea's wedding was the pinnacle of Ghislaine networking her way into the former president's charitable work. A photo from 2002 on a trip to Africa shows Clinton standing on the steps of Epstein's plane with his arm on the shoulder of a smiling Maxwell. Clinton also personally signed a copy of his memoir, To Ghislaine with Love. Later, she would even use her connections to Clinton in an effort to get herself a lower sentence. Maxwell claimed that by helping launch the Clinton Global Initiative, demonstrated she has a desire to do good in the world. Friends say the former US president was smitten. And it's clear from her prison interview that for Maxwell, the feeling was mutual.
Well, he's one of the most interesting people I've ever met. He was extremely sharp and interesting, and has a broad range of knowledge on the world.
So much for her celebrity friends. As Maxwell has told her family, she's lost everything. Her money, her power, her influence, and now her freedom. But what about her victims? What about the many women she's accused of procuring for Epstein for him to abuse? Girls like Maria and Annie Farmer, groomed by Maxwell before being supplied to Epstein. During her sentencing, Maxwell said she wanted to acknowledge the pain of her victims, but stopped short of an apology. And once again in this interview, there was a telling lack of remorse when asked, what do you say to the many women who feel betrayed by you and want you to stay in jail?
I say that Epstein died and they should take their disappointment and upset out on the authorities that allowed that to happen. And that, as I said, I hope that they have some closure by the judicial process that took place. And I wish them time to heal and to be able to have a productive and good life going forward. And that's what I hope for them.
And this is what she had to say when she was asked, if you win your appeal, do you think you'll be accepted again by the very people who were once your friends?
Well, I can't know what my friends will do or won't do. I mean, my focus won't be on that. I will always turn to what I've now decided that will form the rest of my life, which is helping other people who are or have been incarcerated.
Characteristically, Maxwell ended her interview with one final pity me plea when asked by her brother Kevin, who is the real Ghislaine. It provoked a typical response. Blame the media, blame Epstein, blame anyone but herself.
So everyone was always asking, who is the real G? Who's the real Ghislaine?
Well, I think the best people to answer that is probably the people who are closest to me, like you. But it's definitely not the person portrayed. I feel completely divorced from the person that people reference and talk about in all the various newspaper articles and TV shows and podcasts.
And so the biggest misconception of you?
That I'm the cruelest, meanest, horriblest person who's committed crimes.
So there it is, Ghislaine Maxwell in her own words in her first ever prison interview. And after the break, I'll be decoding what she said with our experts and asking, what does it mean for Epstein's victims, and could it help Prince Andrew? We're coming back in 3 on Jeremy Kyle Live. Welcome back to this very special Jeremy Kyle Live with disgraced socialite and convicted sex offender Ghislaine Maxwell, speaking out for the very first time from behind bars. Now, your questions have been pouring in all day, including one in particular. How much did we pay Maxwell for this interview? Let me tell you categorically, Not a damn penny, and nor would we. The journalist she spoke to alongside her brother Kevin was Daphne Barak, someone Ghislaine has known and trusted for the best part of 19 years. And earlier, I spoke to Daphne about why Maxwell was breaking her silence, why now, and I started by asking how she seemed mentally when she saw her in prison.
I was actually surprised. I'm asking her several times, are you suicidal? Because 2 days after I met her in the jail, she was put on a suicidal watch, but she insists she's not suicidal. She is very strong, Jeremy. I mean, the condition in the first jail, MDC in Brooklyn, were really tough. And she's very strong. She even looked good. I mean, the jail executive assistant told me that they allow her even to put makeup when she saw me, but she looked very good after all the alleged abuse. And she's strong. And right now she's appealing on January 31st, and she really, truly believes that she has a chance. So
well, let's take that a stage further, because people tuning in tonight would expect me to ask the questions that need to be asked. And it's all well and good to talk about the standard of the jail and whether she wears makeup or not. But what jumps out of this interview is her absolute... Well, she just hasn't apologised to her victims. Why not?
And I asked her. It bothered me as well. Well, legally, Jeremy, she cannot apologize because she is appealing. So if she shows remorse, which we all expect her to show, then basically she admits wrongdoing, which she's not right now. Let's see what will happen after the appeal. But it did bother me. She does say in the video interview, in a way, she's trying to say that she is she's hoping that the victim could move forward move on with their lives, but that's not an apology. I totally agree with you.
From a British point of view, I think that the one thing that comes out massively is how scathing she is about Virginia Roberts, of course, and that now infamous photograph with Prince Andrew. Ghislaine says it's a fake. She says that it's definitely photoshopped. As a really seasoned journalist, what is her motivation for doing this right now? Is it to help Prince Andrew?
And I must say no, because I asked her about Prince Andrew on the second interview, and she avoided it most of the time. From 80 minutes audio call, and it's taped, it's documented. She didn't want to talk about him, and only towards the end I cornered her about the photo. What happened is, when in the video interview, maybe because it was video and she saw us and her brother was with me, maybe she got emotional and she suddenly said something which surprised me, that no, Prince Andrew and Virginia Giuffre never met at her place in London. The lawsuit of Jeffrey basically said that it all started there, that Ghislaine introduced her and Prince Andrew, and then allegedly they went to the Trump club, and then they came back home, and that's when he had sex with her.
Do you Daphne, do you find the fake photo defence plausible? Because most people in this country are incredulous at it.
Well, the question, Jeremy, because there is no original. So you cannot, I'm speaking to Andrew's attorneys. They hired the best experts possible, but there's no original. So you cannot really know one way or another.
This could have wide-ranging implications on the royal family.
Yes.
What is her motive? You spent hours with her. What's her motivation?
The fact that it will help Prince Andrew. I mean, Andrew, I'm very close to the most closest people to him. And I think there is a feeling right now that he settled too quickly, and he might have misunderstood that what he gave, the titles and all that, would not be given back to him. So it's a tough reality for him. So if indeed he was forced to settle for something he didn't do, and don't forget, he did other mistake, to befriend a pedophile and to go and visit him after the pedophile was convicted and spent time in jail.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a huge mistake, right? He did other mistake, but whether he really had sex with Virginia Giuffre when she was underage, that's a different issue. And if he did not, and he was forced to settle, I think it will be definitely it's something which is being considered legally right now. I can definitely confirm to you.
What would he make of this? Would he be delighted that Ghislaine is speaking out? Would he think, oh, I just wish this would go away? You say you're close to people who are closest to him. Will he be pleased about this interview or not?
Look, I in a perfect world, Jeremy, I wish the same information Ghislaine is giving would come from a saint like Mother Teresa, right? That would be the perfect script, right? But unfortunately, it's coming from a convicted sex offender. However, no, the atmosphere, Prince Andrew is, I wouldn't say delighted, I may be relieved that somebody is supporting his truth and somebody in a position of knowledge, somebody who was there. And if he doesn't do it, it will not go away. He thought he will settle and it will not go away. So right now, when his mother, his beloved mother died, he knows that none of the privileges are going to come back. And actually, I understand that there are some bad messengers with more bad news several days after the funeral. So if he doesn't fight back, who will fight for him?
Let's get some reaction to this bombshell interview now. My panel in the studio, delighted to be joined by TV psychologist Emma Kenny. From New York is author and investigative journalist Vicky Ward and American attorney Lisa Bloom, who represented a number of Jeffrey Epstein's victims. She joins from Los Angeles. Ladies, welcome. If I could start, please, with you, Vicky Ward. An author, an investigative journalist who, to be fair, first blew the lid on who Epstein was and what he got up to. When you've seen and heard what Ghislaine Maxwell said, why no apology? The repercussions from that are going to be horrific. Why would she not take this opportunity, having been incarcerated for 20 years, to apologise to her victims?
Well, you know, I paid attention to what Daphne Barrack said. You know, she is in the middle of an appeal, but, you know, and so she doesn't want to admit that she did anything wrong here. At the same time, you can say to victims of Epstein's sexual abuse, I am so sorry that that happened. You know, I would think a lot of people feel that Prince Andrew, in his interview, would have been a lot better off if he had said, I am so sorry that Virginia Roberts has obviously experienced such trauma. You know, an apology, I think, would obviously have been great, but it speaks to the sort of reality distortion field that Ghislaine Maxwell has always been in. She was in this bubble around Jeffrey Epstein. His world was sort of enclosed. It was isolated from the rest of society, and now we know why. He had all these underage women brought to him. He was not out and about in New York. She was, but then she would bring them back to these fancy Shangri-Las where this terrible, terrible abuse happened. And it's almost like that bubble around her is still there. I mean, when she was talking about the Queen, it sounded like she was at a garden party.
Absolutely.
It's amazing.
Vicky, you've studied her for a long time. Simple question, scapegoat or monster, Ghislaine Maxwell?
Look, I sat through that trial. What she did was monstrous. She was not the only person responsible for Jeffrey Epstein's awful sex trafficking enterprise. It was an enterprise, and there are a lot of other people, a lot of men particularly, out there who really should be held to account as well. And the travesty is that no one is talking about them.
I think that's absolutely right. Lisa Bloom, an American attorney who represented 8 of Epstein's victims. Welcome to Jeremy Kyle Live. Everybody talks about this infamous black book and the alleged names that might be in it. Let's start, as I want to start, with you. You've represented the victims. That's what we should be talking about here. How would they feel after this interview tonight?
Well, it's just another punch in the gut to them. I mean, let's be clear. She's a sociopath. She's not expressing any remorse or any apology because she doesn't feel it. And she's never going to. And if she ever did express it, it would be scripted for her so that it would advance something on her behalf. I mean, I don't expect any change from her. But the good news is she's got 20 years behind bars to think about what she's done and perhaps change, although nobody's holding their breath and waiting for that. You know, my clients' lives are devastated. They will never be the same. They're sexual relationships, their emotional health, their career losses. I mean, this is something they have to deal with every day. They're glad Ghislaine is exactly where she should be, in prison. And, you know, whenever she opens her mouth, you can predict that she's going to be feeling sorry for herself, playing the victim, playing the scapegoat. It's just the same old thing from her.
Lisa, just to ask you from a legal perspective, over the weekend, stories emanating from the press over here that Prince Andrew is allegedly preparing a case to try and overturn his multi-million-pound settlement with Virginia Giuffre. How do you see that panning out? Because I wouldn't understand from a non-legal point of view how you'd pay out if you were innocent and then consider to change 12 months later. But then we're told our king now is supportive of this. What do you make of all of that legally?
Good. Let me break this down for you. The chances of him getting out of that settlement are somewhere between no way and no how. It is not happening. He is a grown man. He was 61 years old at the time that he settled it. He had very experienced counsel, some of the best in America, representing him. It was negotiated for weeks. He had the opportunity not to enter into it if he didn't want to. The fact that he now has buyer's remorse and he wants to get out of it, it's just not going to happen.
Completely agree. Emma Kenny, delighted to have you on. Can I just make a point and say we have reached out to Virginia Giuffre's team, her legal team, because if you noticed during that interview, Ghislaine Maxwell questioned her memory. We're still to hear back from them, and it's important we make that point. Emma Kenny, welcome. What struck you about that interview? Sociopath, victim, body language? Talk to me.
I mean, it's so massive to deconstruct because all of it was so narcissistic. I mean, the fact that she introduced the perspective about how helpful she is in prison and how she's almost a martyr there and she's doing this job, but really it's superiority. She's saying, I'm better than the rest of the prisoners and I'm useful here. But then the way that she describes the victims, which is always a way of disassociating herself from the actual reality of her crime. It's never that she was actually responsible. It's always that she is a victim of circumstance. That was the same in the trial. So the consequence is what you see, even though there is appeal pending, and therefore she's not going to say I was absolutely guilty, the actual arrogance and superiority plays perfectly into the self-centeredness of a narcissist, a true narcissist. That's why she was described as a sociopath a moment ago, because the sense is it doesn't matter what I've done, the world is mine to create as I wish to create. And unfortunately, it's gone wrong, and that shouldn't happen to me, ever.
You've worked extensively with survivors and victims of sexual abuse. The impact on them watching that unapologetic interview would be what?
Well, I think, first of all, there is an expectation that these kind of abusers never see their crime. That's why they continue to perpetuate it. That will not surprise victims. Yeah. But I think what is really upsetting for those individuals who've been sex trafficked and sexually abused is that often they are painted in the press as somehow wanting to have gained that kind of attention. And I think in this case, that's been the case. You know, the girls have been made to look like there were credibility issues. The girls were said to want to go back to the island. That's just the reality of sex trafficking. You're coerced into a situation and then you're abused within that. So I think it's going to be just more of the same for them. What they want is her to say, I am guilty, I did a horrible thing, I'm going to serve my sentence, I'm going to learn my lessons, but that would be impossible for someone with her mindset. It's not going to happen, is it?
If I can bring Vicky Ward back in. You've covered so much, Vicky, over the years of Jeffrey Epstein. We keep talking about his relationship with the Duke of York, and certainly when somebody's a convicted paedophile, to be seen and photographed with him 2 years later is another unbelievably bad judgment by that man. Let's talk about the fake photo. It was central to that interview. Do you believe it's real? Do you think it's fake, Vicky? You've followed this for so long.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think what's interesting about that photograph is how hung up Ghislaine Maxwell is on it, because, you know, as far as my memory serves, I thought a lot about this overnight, it was not brought into evidence at Ghislaine Maxwell's trial. So it kind of like, why are we even talking about it? I suspect the reason Ghislaine Maxwell wants to talk about it is because that photograph became the beginning of her end, because that is what sort of turned Virginia Roberts into a story that everyone paid attention to. It wasn't because of Jeffrey Epstein or of Ghislaine Maxwell in that photograph. It was the presence of a global celebrity, namely Prince Andrew. And so when Virginia Roberts then joined the other victims in a class action suit at the end of 2014, this story and that lawsuit had legs, and it did attract a lot of attention. That then led to civil litigation between Maxwell and Virginia, and the depositions in that civil litigation is ultimately what led to both the criminal suits against Jeffrey Epstein and to Ghislaine Maxwell, and that in turn led to the civil difficulties that Prince Andrew had. So the whole thing is a big snowball, and that, I think, is why Ghislaine Maxwell is so hung up on that photograph. If that photograph had never seen the light of day, who knows if we'd been sitting here today having this conversation.
Lisa, any legal credence in court that this photo could be fake? How do you see that working out?
Well, so we've heard this claim for a long time, and we've heard it... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go, Lisa. No, you. It's your go.
So Prince Andrew was in active litigation with Virginia for many months. He had every opportunity at that point to prove that the photo was fake. If it was, he could subpoena the original, send it out to experts, and we never heard any proof that it was fake. I think Ghislaine Maxwell is trying to establish that now to help her friend Prince Andrew. I don't think it is particularly helpful to Prince Andrew that his only public advocate in the entire world is a convicted sex trafficker currently serving a 20-year sentence. But if he wanted to prove that, he could have proved it. But his case is over because he's a grown man and he chose to settle it. It's over. He's not going to have the chance to reopen it and try to prove this now.
I mean, that's my point, and you're a legal expert. Why would you accept something that damns you forever and pay out that money and be sent into, well, nowhere, right, from your family, and then 12 months later, over here we read stories about he was pressurised into it because his mother, the late Queen, bless her, was ill, and King Charles was forcing him, and yet, as I said at the beginning, today we read that Charles is supportive of this. It seems to me there's a very strange link between Ghislaine wanting to speak now and Andrew coming out in the press, and I think there's so much more to come. Would you agree with that, Vicky?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the one thing that we haven't talked about, and I assume Ghislaine Maxwell was referencing it in your interview when she was attacking Virginia Roberts' credibility, as you said, in a blistering way. She was clearly talking about what happened in Virginia Roberts' lawsuit against Alan Dershowitz, the law professor who at one point had represented Jeffrey Epstein, was a friend of him. Virginia Roberts had claimed she'd been sexually abused by Dershowitz, having been introduced to him by Epstein. And that case was dismissed, and Virginia Roberts did say that she, quote unquote, may have been mistaken in identifying Alan Dershowitz. And that, I think, is where the question marks have come in. And if you are
But you would
Prince
understand,
Andrew,
if I can just jump in, you would understand those question marks. I'm not on any side, by the way. She's a convicted felon. But Alan Dershowitz, who, by the way, I can announce will be live on Jeremy Kyle Live tomorrow, he represented Epstein. He was accused by Virginia Giuffre, née Roberts. That was thrown out. That is said, ladies, to encourage Prince Andrew. But my question to Vicky and Lisa, I'll start with you, Lisa, is why didn't he realise it at that time? It's almost too little too late.
Well, absolutely. And these arguments were all part of the case at the time. We heard Alan Dershowitz for years has said he never had anything to do with Virginia Roberts, that she had inconsistent statements as to him and as to others. I mean, these arguments have all been out there. They were all litigated. They were all, I'm sure, discussed at great length by Prince Andrew and his attorneys together in agreeing to reach that settlement. And I'm sure there was a lot also going on that they knew about that we don't know about. That's how settlements work. Every day in high-profile sexual abuse cases, I advise my clients, look, here's the strengths of your case, here's the weaknesses of your case. If you go to trial, here's how I assess your chances of winning. And we take all of that into account in making decisions to settle. There's no perfect case. There's no perfect defense. This has all been done. It's all been litigated. It doesn't matter that there was a different outcome for Alan Dershowitz. As to Prince Andrew, it is simply over.
OK. Emma, to bring you back in, you talked about her words. She made a case that she was suffering from depression. Do you buy any of that, or do you think that is also part of the narcissistic facade that she seems to portray?
I mean, I wouldn't doubt that when you take complete control away from somebody who's got narcissistic tendencies, they're going to absolutely feel depressed because they can't control the world around them anymore. I think what's really telling, though, is she always disassociates herself from the reality of what she has been involved in. even if it wasn't, as far as she was concerned, the person instigating it, she was involved in it. She could have easily apologised to the victims in a much more open and honest way. And also, I have to say, what really strikes me is this idea about the picture and all the things around that. A victim doesn't have to be perfect. Victims don't have to remember everything properly. They are human beings and they make mistakes.
Just very quickly before we speak to Piers, why do you believe, 30 seconds, that she decided to speak out now, Ghislaine Maxwell?
Oh, I believe that she spoke out because she somehow believes that if she gets her story out there, people will believe her and suddenly the world will do her bidding because that's what she used to.
And she would feel important again in terms of Prince Andrew?
Absolutely. It's essential for a narcissist to feel that they are the most important person in the room, no matter what the cost to others.
Emma Kenny, Vicky Ward, Lisa Bloom, thank you so much for your involvement in Jeremy Carr Live. To repeat, Alan Dershowitz, Epstein's lawyer, will be live tomorrow. This story will go and go, and it will continue with the big man himself. Piers Morgan Uncensored is next on TV. Good evening, my friend. What's coming up?
Well, what a show that was. Extraordinary tapes there of Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeremy. I've got to say, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying any of what she's saying. I totally agree with what your last guest just said, which is this is all about her last desperate attempt to try and get off a rap that she thoroughly deserved. And, of course, the best way for her to do that is to say, we've all been framed in this. Only Epstein was the bad guy. I was framed. Andrew was framed. We were all caught up with this horrible man and we didn't know anything better. I'm just not buying it. I met Ghislaine Maxwell once for a few minutes. Very smart person. Too smart to have bought into this by accident.
And the other thing, buddy, is, of course, all the other names in the famous Black Book. So Piers is next. That's all we have time for on tonight's JK Special. On tomorrow's show, Jeffrey Epstein's defence lawyer, Alan Dershowitz. It's a promise he'll be here. I'll be taking him to task and finding out what leading women's rights attorney Gloria Allred makes of tonight's revelations for the Epstein victims she represented. Thank you so much indeed for watching. Good night.